Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. Y'all know the vibes. We back for a react. This one is going to be coming from the sitcom guy, the death of teen sitcoms. I know when I was coming up, we had That's So Raven, Drake and Josh, and quite a few others. And I must say, yeah, I was definitely tapped in with the teen sitcoms back then. And then poof, they were out of there. You didn't really see teen sitcoms at all, probably once I got out of high school. There may have been a few, but they started to slowly get rid of it. But this is going to be interesting. We're going to see what this video is talking about. Let's get to it.
There was a period of time where teen sitcoms absolutely dominated kids' TV. Drake and Josh, iCarly, That's So Raven, Zoe 101, Lizzie McGuire, Keenan and Kel, Boy Meets World, Saved by the Bell. There was like a good 20-year stretch where these shows were the thing. Not just popular, but the biggest shows on kids' networks. They created stars and launched music careers, movie careers. They had entire brands built around these shows. And, you know, looking back on it, it's hard to really fathom how dominant these shows really were, because every kid in America was watching them. And I mean everybody knew about That's So Raven, everybody knew about Zach and Cody and Hannah Montana. We all knew these characters and we knew all the references to the shows, and it didn't matter where you were from, didn't matter what school you went to.
I gotta say, I know for, you know, my cats that I was like friends and cool with, how we were moving back in this time. This is when hip hop was already an influence, but this is when we started to kind of like mature, you know, that maturity and like hormones and stuff like that. So I can say without hesitation, we really were kind of off teen sitcoms. I would say probably by the time we got to like 14, 15, we was off this. You know, we was outside playing ball, you know, at the rec, whatever, in the park. Like, we wasn't really watching TV. I know for me, like cats that I was around, we wasn't really on this anymore. But these are really good shows, though. You know, I definitely, when I had the time, I would tap into That's So Raven, watch an episode of Drake and Josh. I really wasn't watching iCarly and all of that stuff, and I wasn't into that. But it was there. I know some people used to watch Degrassi. I didn't watch Degrassi. I know my cousin, she used to watch that, but yeah.
And it didn't matter what kind of kid you were. If you grew up during this era, chances are these shows were part of your childhood. And it's kind of crazy because teen sitcoms themselves weren't always a thing. And in the modern day, they're basically a dead genre. Netflix and other networks are still making new sitcoms, and networks are still rebooting old shows as well. But the teen sitcom genre has almost quietly disappeared. That entire ecosystem just feels gone, and honestly, it's got me thinking, what actually happened to teen sitcoms?
I'm gonna tell you what happened before he gets to it. What basically happened was that teenagers wanted to be outside. They wanted to be outside. You feel me? They were like, listen, we off that. I would also go as far as to say the cell phone also plays a big contributor, in my opinion, to why you don't see many teen sitcoms, because people are too on the move now, especially teenagers. You know, they're in school, they're out of school, and they're getting, like, teen sitcoms have always been, you know, G-rated. They never really teeter-tottered on stuff that was a little too adult-like, and we got to understand that a lot of these teenagers today are into adult stuff that they shouldn't be into. And they getting it from TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter. So that's, I think, in my opinion, part of what it is. But let's see what happens.
So it's actually funny to think about it now, because sitcoms feel like they've existed forever at this point, but they were never originally made for kids specifically. They were always for adults and more about families for the most part. You had shows like Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, I Love Lucy, The Honeymooners, you know, adult shows, family shows, workplace shows, that type of stuff. They had
I'm tapped in, y'all. I used to watch some of this stuff.
But they were more so side characters.
Because of my grandparents.
They weren't necessarily the entire focus. You know, one of the earliest examples people point to is Dobie Gillis back in 1959.
I don't know about
the
this.
School and the dating and trying to fit in. all that kind of cliche stuff. And it almost feels like a prototype for what this genre would go on to be later on. You know, it's almost like they kind of stumbled onto this idea decades before it would become this huge phenomenon, right? And you know, later you get shows like Happy Days and The Monkees and What's Happening, you know, youth oriented television. But if you're looking for the modern blueprint for teen sitcoms, the thing that Nickelodeon and Disney would eventually perfect, that probably would start with Saved by the Bell. Saved by the Bell is kind of patient zero for the type of formula that you would see later on. This was a pretty major pivot.
I didn't watch Saved by the Bell because I was a little too young for this. I was born in 1989, so my aunt Tori, she was born in 75. This was her era. Saved by the Bell, things like that. A Different World. Like, I wasn't really watching Saved by the Bell. But yeah,
in TV history, because networks were starting to realize that kids wanted to watch other kids their age. Shocking revelation there, I know, but before this, most sitcoms were just more adult oriented. Teen sitcoms translated that exact formula onto younger audiences. Instead of marriages, you had stuff like first crushes, and instead of the normal office drama or workplace rivalries, you would have school drama and sibling rivalry, popularity, cliques, relationships with teachers, getting your first job, getting your first car, you know, everything that teenagers
these were the early stages of Nickelodeon.
And that was a genius formula, because maybe for the first time in TV history, kids could actually see their own lives reflected back at them. And once networks realized that this was a gold mine, the floodgates just opened, and you had shows like Clarissa Explains It All, Sister Sister, Boy Meets World, Kenan and Kel, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, all these 90s shows that kind of spawned after Saved by the Bell.
And you know, too, I was just thinking as I'm looking at all of these visuals from these particular shows, I think too what also you have to factor in is what it is that these people, these characters that are being played by these actors, what they're actually getting into. They were getting into things that teenagers typically get into for those time frames, and that during that time period, you know what I'm saying, space and time. A lot of this stuff that you see them doing now, like I said, most of these teenagers are not doing that anymore. So they can't really relate, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying?
Suddenly, there was just this entire lane being carved out specifically for this genre. And by the late 90s and early 2000s, Disney and Nickelodeon were basically pushing these shows out like a sweatshop. Drake and Josh,
Yeah.
and Zoe 101.
It was a lot.
And
It was
Ned's
too much to keep up with.
Declassified, iCarly, Lizzie McGuire, and That's So Raven, and Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, Hannah Montana, Wizards of Waverly Place, and all of these shows just dominated.
Yeah, see, my cousins and them, they probably watched a lot of these. My cousins, they're mostly girls, but they probably watched a lot of this stuff on the Disney Channel. I can tell you now, all that was definitely in the lineup. We was watching all that heavy. Kenan and Kel, we definitely watched that. That's So Raven, we was watching that joint. I did watch a few episodes of Drake and Josh. All the rest of these, they did not make my radar. You know what I'm saying? I really wasn't. Like I said, my mind was in other places by this point. You know, I was looking at girls and playing Xbox and listening to Dipset and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying?
Dominated that 2000s decade. And it really made, you know, childhood itself start feeling like a brand in some sense. You know, you had more Disney kids and other kids that were more Nickelodeon kids. You know, and people always argued. I remember when I was a kid that people always argued over which network was better.
I'm going to tell you right now, Nickelodeon. And I F with Disney. I do. You know what I'm saying? They had the Kim Possible, Proud Family, That's So Raven. What's another one? I can't think of any right now. Y'all could throw them down in the comments, but Nickelodeon is king when it comes to that. Sorry. You know what I'm saying? Like, argue with yourself.
Were arguing like these were sports teams, and these shows got massive. You know, iCarly episodes were pulling like 10 million viewers per episode,
and that was on Nickelodeon.
Hannah Montana became a worldwide phenomenon.
That was Disney.
Not only was the show huge, but Miley Cyrus became one of the biggest celebrities on earth. She had tours and albums and merchandise and movies.
Wonder what happened to her.
Crossovers.
Well,
with
we
Zack
know
and
what happened
Cody,
to her.
You know, special events. And I think what you would see around all these shows are these ecosystems, you know. And, you know, while millennials and Gen Z didn't exactly witness the invention of the teen sitcom, we definitely experienced their absolute peak, not the beginning, but the golden age. They're the period
Yeah.
where teen sitcoms completely dominated youth culture. And it was kind of insane because it was one of the last true examples of a youth monoculture. Everybody saw the same episodes and heard the same jokes and sang the same theme songs. And that's a type of thing that you just don't see today. And
Oh wait, what about Taina? That's another one.
I think this is the part people don't really talk about enough, because these shows mattered, not because they were masterpieces by any means, not because every episode was just unbelievable, but because they gave kids emotional guidance without feeling too preachy, without feeling educational. For example, a show like Drake and Josh isn't just about stepbrothers. Obviously, it's a relatable situation, but a lot of the bigger themes there are learning how to live with somebody that's completely different than you. Again, that's one of those things that almost everybody can relate to, and especially if you have siblings. These shows made growing up seem fun, and it kept things optimistic. Even in harder situations, they still found a way to spin it to have a positive attitude towards everything. And I don't think people talk enough about what these shows actually did for, again, that generation. And another thing about this too is that for a lot of kids, these were probably the first sitcoms they ever watched before they were exposed to stuff like Friends or Cheers or Seinfeld or Frasier, King of Queens, Martin, all this kind of stuff. These shows were basically like the training wheels for those, and they introduced us to ensemble casts and running jokes and recurring characters and callbacks, season arcs, character archetypes. They introduced millions
Archetypes that no longer exist in the teenage world today.
of people to the sitcom formula itself, and that is dope. I loved Sanford and Son growing up. I loved Martin growing up, but I didn't necessarily understand why I loved them, because I was so young when I was watching them. These teen sitcoms made a lot more sense to me at the time. I could relate to Drake and Josh. I could relate to these younger characters. Then eventually, as I got older, I found my way into those mature sitcoms, and I think that's probably true for a lot of people as well. These were kind of like a gateway and prepared you for those more mature themes that would come later. And I think, just in my opinion, that's kind of profound if you really think about it. So if these shows were so great and all this, then what happened? Well, I think all in all, the environment that created these shows just kind of faded away. Cable television is pretty much non-existent these days. Streaming is pretty much the way to watch TV now. You got YouTube being the biggest media platform on earth. You had TikTok coming out of left field and giving everybody brain rot. Social media has kind of become everything in this day and age, and kids just aren't on the same stuff anymore. Everybody's just consuming all kinds of different media. Some kids watch Twitch streaming, some kids watch TikTok, some people watch YouTube, some barely watch anything at all. Everything is so niche and personalized now that everybody has their own algorithm, their own feed, their own rabbit hole.
Right. And then you also got to add to that too. When you take people like Kai Cenat or I Show Speed, who's traveling around the world, going to different countries, there's no sitcom that I don't think could compete with that in today's age. Now, for nostalgia purposes, people that watch the older teen sitcoms, they'll watch them and they hold their own for the time that they were in, because we can't necessarily compare IRL streaming to a sitcom of the 90s, because IRL streaming didn't exist then. But if you were to create a teen-based sitcom today, I don't think any teenager would be interested in watching that. When you have somebody like Speed at a football game, being animated, going crazy, or Kai Cenat unveiling the Streamer University students and having over 1 million plus people tapped into that live stream, you can't really compete with that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's why a lot of these networks, broadcast companies, they're like, look, we don't even have it within the budget to do that. We just don't have it. Now, what might be, I was just thinking, now I'm thinking on it, like, imagine if they did make a sitcom with the likes of I Show Speed, Kai Cenat, Mr. Beast, like those guys. Even though they're not teenagers no more, they resonate with teenagers because they are pretty young themselves. But That would be a interesting. That would be interesting to see.
And I think once that happened, these teen sitcoms lost their biggest advantage, which was shared experience, because that's really what these shows were thriving on, was that monoculture. And now that environment just does not exist.
It evaporated.
Again, adult sitcoms continue surviving because adults still crave comfort TV. Obviously, people still endlessly rewatch stuff like Friends or The Office.
I was gonna say, even with adult sitcoms, they not even really hitting like they did in the 90s. Yeah, you have a few out there, you know, Tyler Perry with some of his sitcoms. I don't know if he has any new ones out. You know what it is? People are more into drama series like Power, Raising Kanan, The Shy. They're more into those that have a bit of suspense and leave you wanting more. You know, sitcoms, it's a lot of slapstick comedy, things like that. There are some serious moments, but people are more into like drama series today. You feel me? Of course, Martin, The Fresh Prince, those have a lot of replay value because of people like my age and older who were around when these sitcoms were on TV. But if you're trying to come into the sitcom space now, you really got to figure out what people would want to watch. It's hard, man. It's tough. It would be tough.
Sir Martin, whatever. But younger audiences seem to consume entertainment completely differently.
They do
gravitate towards drama and reality TV and influencers. And the even younger kids, like the kids that are under 10 years old, they're growing up in a completely different media landscape.
Exactly.
With, you know, pretty much brain rot around every corner. And honestly, it's just sad and depressing in a lot.
It is sad and depressing. I will agree with him on that. You know, me and my mom, we were briefly watching White Chicks. So she started playing White Chicks today. And me and her both were sitting there laughing, but we both agreed that the Wayans, they couldn't make a movie like that now. Like the type of stuff that they were making fun of in that movie, it just wouldn't work today. And we seen evidence of that with the Scary Movie. I did go and see that, and it just wasn't hitting like the other Scary Movies. And I think it's because they tried to kind of ride the fence on trying to appease us, older generation, but not piss off the younger generation because they want their eyeballs too, but they know that they may not comprehend that comedy in that way. Because I told my mom, I was like, the 20-something-year-olds that went to go see White Chicks 22 years ago are not the same 20-something-year-olds today going to the movies to see a funny movie. They're just, their mechanics are not the same in terms of what they may feel is funny. There's some out there, but very few.
A lot of ways, because
that
these
find that type of
shows
stuff
might have
funny.
been one of the last truly shared childhood experiences, and I think that's something worth appreciating, because for a brief period in TV history, millions and millions of kids kind of grew up together on the same characters and the same channels. And maybe that's why these shows still feel so special to us that experienced it, because it kind of represents the entire era. And if you happen to grow up during this time, you should consider yourself lucky, because we got to.
Was I lucky? We were lucky. You know, we were all lucky to have grown up during this time because we got to see it all. You feel me? Like, I really wouldn't undo my childhood or anything. I'm glad that I grew up before all of this tech stuff. Do I appreciate it? Absolutely, because I'm able to do things like this. But I can also appreciate when it didn't exist, because there was a human-to-human experience when it came to stuff like this. Because you come to school the next day like, yo, did you watch such and such and such? You know what I'm saying? It's not like that today. It's more so like kids today. I'm going to let it play after this because it's almost over. But it was almost more like today with kids. Like, they'll be on their phones in the cafeteria, and one kid will come over to them and like, yo, check this out. And they both would be laughing, you know? It wasn't like that for us growing up. We had to watch something on TV, laugh about it, and then come to school the next day and then joke, talk and joke about it, things like that. That's what we had to do,
Experience something that television might never be able to recreate again.
Nah. It's the end of the video. Yo, shouts out to the sitcom guy, you know what I'm saying? Another good one, another banger, you know what I'm saying? Make sure y'all go sub up to his channel, check out his videos. Yeah, I agree. You know, it sucks that teen sitcoms are no longer a thing because I do feel like that could be something that teens need to kind of restructure how they think and things like that, and kind of get out of adult stuff, because I think technology has made everything accessible to them at a rapid speed. So they're seeing things that only somebody my age should probably see. And so they want to be in on what adults are doing. And it wasn't necessarily like that for us early on. I really didn't start focusing on adult stuff until I was like 17, 18. And then at that point, it's like, you know, I'm almost a grown man. But early on, 12, 13, 14, you know, I was still relatively kid minded. You know, I didn't mind watching, you know, Johnson Family Vacation or watching That's So Raven. There was still a part of me that wanted to indulge in that. But yeah, y'all let me know what y'all think. You know, if y'all feel the same way. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Make sure you check the like button, sub up to the channel, and sound off in the comments till they kick y'all up out of there. That being said, it's your boy Robbie. To the next video, we out.